9 of Mets Off Day Live. I'm your host, Michelle Margaux, and joining us today are the Mets Pod's Joe DeMayo and senior national MLB writer Britt Ghiroli. We're going to talk all things Mets over the next half hour, and we will take some fan questions live as they come in, so put them in the chat wherever you are watching. But first, welcome to the show, Joe and Britt.
Appreciate you having me.
Yes, thanks for having me, Michelle. It was so nice to see you in Seattle, and now I get to see you on my computer. How lucky am I?
Oh my gosh. Somehow we were in Seattle yesterday. Now we're in the East Coast today. But before we get into a little second half preview of the Mets, let's talk about how some of the Mets spent their off days. So Jeff McNeil, to no surprise to anybody, got a round of golf in. And Mark Canha went to the beach. Adam Ottavino went to Aspen. Pete Alonso and Kodai Senga obviously were in Seattle at the All-Star game, so they didn't really get much of an off couple days here. So which All-Star break sounds nicest to you, Britt?
I'm going to go with Aspen. I mean, that sounds like a great time to me. Great weather, really relaxing vibe. You know, you can't really leave the country right now because it's such a short little break. So, yeah, I'm going to go with that.
Joe, what do you think?
I'm going to go with golf like Jeff McNeil. I'm a bit of a golf nut, and I would go play and just play simply not nearly as good as Jeff McNeil can, but I'd be out there trying.
Does anybody play as well as Jeff McNeil can? He's like a scratch golfer. But Britt, you were at the All-Star game. Do you have any stories that Mets fans might want to hear?
So I think one of the cooler things that I heard was that Pete Alonso signed all of the balls that he hit out in the home run derby. So every fan who caught a ball that was a Pete Alonso ball was also an autograph ball. And I'm wondering, guys, why don't we just do that for all of the guys? Because that would just make the experience even cooler. No, they all do?
They all do. And I know this because I made the mistake of asking Pete about it. And he was like, what are you talking about? Every guy does that. And I
didn't know this.
I know. Neither did I. And somehow nobody ever knew this. I don't know how nobody ever knew this, but Pete Alonso said that every guy signs about 24 balls. That way, like, sometimes it's a surprise whether the kids who are shagging the balls or guys or kids that are catching them, that when they actually get hit outside the ballpark, they catch one and it has an autograph on it. So apparently 24 people got balls that have signatures of all of the home run derby participants. I also was unaware of that, but still very cool for anyone who got.
I don't think anyone was aware of that. I mean, I've been covering baseball since 2008, and I feel like nobody talks about that. Okay, well, that was my cool All-Star story. I also think that Ohtani talking to Kodai Senga, I don't know if you guys saw that little interaction, was a really cool moment. I mean, first off, there were just hundreds of Japanese media there. And part of it was Seattle, and part of it was just like, this is Shohei Ohtani, and this is kind of what he brings. And then certainly Senga being added late to the game only kind of fueled, I think, maybe people that were on the cusp of should we go, is it worth it? And then watching them have a little like meet and greet in the outfield together, I thought was an awesome moment. Well photographed, of course, but you could kind of see their personalities come out. And I know Senga has made some jokes before, and Ohtani we keep hearing as a jokester, though, you know, we don't really get to see that side of him too much. I thought that was also a really cool kind of smaller moment at the All-Star game that obviously involved one of the Mets.
It is funny because there's National League availability for media and there's American League availability for media. And the fact that Kodai Senga is an NL player and Ohtani's an AL player, it was like there was no chance you were getting to speak to any Japanese player because there was just so much media swarming them at all times. But going into the break, Mets won 6 straight before losing their final 2 games before the All-Star game. So now they're 42 and 48 on the year. So let's give out some superlatives. Joe, I want you to go first. Who was your first half MVP?
I think it has to be Brandon Nimmo. He's been consistent from day one. And even if you go back a couple years, there was some doubts about him being a center fielder defensively. I think there's no doubt going forward, Brandon Nimmo could be the Mets center fielder for years to come. The home run numbers are up. He's pacing to set a new career high in home runs. He's still getting on base on a good clip. Strikeouts are up a little bit, but for a first half that had a ton of inconsistency, Brandon Nimmo was one of the few pieces that was consistent throughout the whole stretch.
Britt, who's yours?
I'm going to go with Lindor. And I know everyone gets frustrated when the Mets don't win, and he seems to be like, you know, public enemy number 1, but he's leading the Mets in WAR. You could have made the case, especially in the last week or two, but heading into the break, that he had a case to go to the All-Star game, and you wouldn't have said like, oh, this guy doesn't deserve it. So, you know, I think he's a guy who, as the Mets go, he goes. And to me, he's a guy who's having a better season than people give him credit for.
I agree with both of yours completely. I have a little bit of recency bias. I was going to go with Francisco Alvarez because he affects both sides of the ball, right? Like first of all, he's given so much life to this offense just from a chemistry standpoint and all of the clutch hits that he's had. And of course, like I said, recency bias, this last road trip, he's absolutely outstanding, the power, everything. But he's also come so far defensively and has an effect on pitching as well. So I like Francisco Alvarez for that. Joe, who is your most surprising?
I'm going to go with Kodai Senga. And it's not that I didn't think he could be good. I certainly didn't think he would be an all-star in his first year over in America. And certainly at the real beginning, it was a lot of ups and downs. He would have very short outings, then he'd have longer outings. It seems he's really found his groove. And Kodai Senga right now is crazy to think the best pitcher on the Mets starting staff right now with the way that Max and Verlander are performing. So just having Senga be kind of as good as he has been, I think it has to be at least somewhat surprising.
I agree.
Yeah, no, that's a great pick. I wasn't sure if this was good surprising or bad surprising. So
we have a lot of bad surprising.
It doesn't matter, just most surprising.
Oh, I went with bad surprising because and to your point, like if you had told me that Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer would combined have a 2 WAR and that Kodai Senga would have, 1.5, I would just think you were insane. And so I think the most surprising to me has been the tandem of Verlander and Scherzer and wildly underperforming. I know part of it has been injury. It's been crazy suspensions in Scherzer's case. But you look at this group, and I don't think if we had polled anybody this winter, if we had said the Mets have a starter in the All-Star game, you're like, oh, it's Scherzer. Oh, okay, then it's Verlander. Like, you're not saying it's Kodai Senga, right? So I'm kind of, I guess, answering on the flip side of what you answered, in that Kodai Senga is so surprising because it is ridiculously surprising that both Scherzer and Verlander have underperformed to this much of a degree, respective of the back of their baseball cards.
Joe, who is your most dependable?
I'm going to go with David Robertson. When Edwin Diaz went down with the injury during the World Baseball Classic, I mean, there was a lot of fear as to how the end of games would go for the Mets. And David Robertson has frankly been nothing short of fantastic. His ERA is below 2. He's been money for the Mets in a situation where they didn't know who was going to close games and how that would kind of translate with Diaz being out. The whole idea was you have Diaz in the 9th, Robertson in the 8th, and you kind of had this mega back of the bullpen. And Robertson had to step into the shoes of the best closer in baseball after a significant injury. So didn't get as many save opportunities as maybe we would have liked to see, but David Robertson certainly has been reliable in the first half.
Britt?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Joe. That's who I had as well. I mean, people were wondering, and there still is a huge hole, right, left by Edwin Diaz. But I think if I had told you that they were going to have David Robertson pitch this well, most people would have signed up for that in blood. So, Kodai Senga, obviously, as we talked about, deserves a nod here too, because we were wondering how this guy was going to adjust to so many things, a new ball, a new mound, pitching in a 5-day rotation. And he has been so much more dependable than Scherzer and Verlander, like I was saying. But to me, Robertson has been a guy who has made it a lot less exciting in the end of the game, and that is the best compliment that you could give to a late inning reliever.
So true. Let's go back to the Futures game for a second here. Mike Vasil, the only Met who played in the MLB Futures game, struck out 1, walked 1. Britt, how would you evaluate his outing in the Futures game?
I thought it was good. I mean, listen, he, prevented a potential comeback by the American League side. And he's a guy who's super interesting because we all know the story, right? He was very well thought of. Then he had some arm issues. His stock dropped. And now, I was reading some of his comments from the Futures game, and he was talking about how he uses that lower draft pick as kind of like motivation. He said kind of like Tom Brady, which I'm not sure I would, having spent 0 days in the big leagues, all of a sudden compare myself to the best, arguably the best NFL quarterback we've seen, certainly the best of maybe this generation, but he's using it as motivation. So I thought it was a good outing from him. I wish the Futures game was longer because ever since they shortened it to 7 innings, it feels like we really don't get to see these guys like we want to see these guys. But it was good to see for a guy who has kind of struggled since he got promoted to AAA to have a pretty uneventful outing.
Joe, you're very well versed in this subject. What have you seen from Vasil this whole season?
So his AA run was nothing short of fantastic. And there was people that were saying he might be the best pitching prospect in the organization based on how he was pitching in Double-A. What was big to me was the walks were down in a significant way. The stuff has ticked up, which is a credit to the Mets player development system, where they found, so if you go back to high school, Mike Vasil was a top 25 prospect in that draft. He pulled out of the draft to pursue his commitment to Virginia. And like Britt said, kind of so-so college career. The Mets kind of reverted him to his high school pitching style, and the stuff has ticked up in a big way. He'll touch 98 miles an hour. The breaking ball is good. The changeup's good. I think he right now stands squarely as the second best pitching prospect in the system, and definitely the closest to big league ready amongst the stars that the Mets have. So Vasil's been a really good player development story in a system that sorely needs some player development stories.
Yeah, huge shout out to the Mets there. Speaking of the future, Francisco Alvarez and Britt Ghiroli seem to have made themselves quite at home at the big league level this season. How would you assess Baty, Joe?
A bit up and down, which I think is kind of par for the course for a lot of young players. I think a lot of people will see like the Ronald Acuna is the Michael Harris is the guys that come up and just like from day one are dominant. Baty has had his ups and downs. The one thing that I want to see him improve upon offensively is get back to getting the ball in the air. When he first got promoted to AAA last year, that was a struggle he had early on, was too many ground balls. And then he worked on his swing, started hitting home runs. And I mean, you saw the highlights on Twitter, even at the beginning of this year, it felt like he hit a home run every day. Now when he is off, it's when he's hitting a lot of ground balls. So he has to get back to putting the ball in the air. But overall, I think he's having an okay rookie campaign. And I certainly believe going forward, he's still an above average regular.
Britt, same question to you, but with Francisco Alvarez.
Yeah, well, you touched on it, Michelle. I mean, he's been hitting, especially as of late. Like you look at his July and you're really encouraged. He was a big part of the Mets really getting it going before heading into the All-Star break. So I think that's encouraging. But most important for a guy like this long-term is going to be behind the plate. Now, he's got an over 8 defensive WAR, which is super impressive when considering that, he hasn't had a whole lot of big league experience. And, watching him and watching guys like Scherzer and Verlander kind of communicate with him between innings to me has been fascinating. Kind of the way that these guys have really taken to him and really enjoy pitching him. And that's not always the case with a rookie catcher. That's not always the case, the guy who doesn't have a lot of big league experience. I mean, teams are very particular. Pitchers are very particular about who they throw to. Look at what happened when Yadier Molina left St. Louis, right? We had the whole Wilson Contreras gate. We had the whole drama that happened in St. Louis. So I think the best compliment you could give Francisco Alvarez, besides his offense, is that he has fit right in. If I didn't know he was a rookie, I wouldn't know he was a rookie from watching these Mets games. And I think that's a really important distinction to make this early on in someone's career.
1000% agree with everything you just said. A guy also that has been potentially in the MVP conversation in terms of our superlatives is Tommy Pham. I mean, he was slashing, I think, in 15 games before getting hurt, which we'll talk about in a second. He slashed 333, 397, 509 with a 906 OPS. So he's now considered day-to-day because he reevaluated for that groin injury. So that could be bad news. That could be good news. But Britt, what has impressed you the most about his success for the Mets this season?
So I remember when they signed him and it was kind of like, yeah, right? Like you're kind of like, okay, cool, whatever, take a flyer on this guy. And I remember talking to someone in the Mets organization about him. And they said, they felt like, he hadn't reached his full potential. He hadn't really clicked with previous coaches. And, the book on him was the effort was usually there as long as he was engaged. And there were some questions about his coachability. And I think what they've done really well and what Wayne Kirby has done really well, who had some familiarity with him in San Diego, is work to his strengths and get to know what makes a guy like Tommy Pham tick. And what they've done and what they've uncovered is the 2019 Tommy Pham, which is what everyone had kind of been looking for, is can he regain that power stroke? Can he be a legitimate bat in the lineup? And he's been the Mets, one of their best hitters by far. He's really been the only guy I think that you can say has outperformed expectations relative to what you thought he was going to do going into spring training. So to me, there's a whole lot of positive stuff with a guy like Tommy Pham, as long as they can keep him engaged, as long as they can make sure that he's a guy who is still all in. I think a lot of the things with Tommy Pham are mental, on the mental side of the game. And they've done a really good job of making sure he's in a really good place.
Well, that begs the question, Joe, do you think that he's going to be able to keep it up in the second half?
I usually believe that players perform to the back of their baseball card by hook or crook, whether it's a good first half, a bad second half, whatever the case may be. So I tend to believe he's going to come back to earth a little bit, but the batted ball profile is fantastic. I mean, it's high exit velocities, high barrel rates. Like when Tommy Pham hits a ball, he hits the ball hard. And that's even been the case when his statistics didn't line up. So I don't know if he'll necessarily put up the same type of numbers that you mentioned, the 900 plus OPS, but given the uncertainty leading into the trade deadline, which I know we'll get into in a minute, certainly it would be nice if he could keep that going for another couple of weeks, just in case things go awry with the big league team.
Well, I think that is the question, is there's room for him to perform like this right now because others are not performing. So if the other people start stepping it up, Tommy Pham might take a back seat, just in general with playing time as well. So we're going to switch gears here to Hard Knocks in honor of the Jets being announced as this season's team on Hard Knocks. Britt, you had written an article that kind of peeled back the curtain on the clubhouse's unwavering support of Buck Showalter. So how do you assess his in-game decisions and his post-game comments this season?
Yeah, so I wrote a column a few weeks ago on The Athletic about how just flummoxed I was by a lot of the way that he treated the media. And, I think the thing with Buck that I was surprised about was how many players in there were still, I was expecting based on how they played, I thought some players would kind of pull me aside and say, we're not really all in on this guy. But everybody in there not only had support, but, seemed to insinuate that anybody reporting otherwise in the media was kind of an idiot. So it was really a strong take by multiple Mets in there that they support Buck Showalter and that they're responsible for the way that they've played. And, I do believe that on one hand. On the other hand, Buck has made some very puzzling decisions. Now, whether it's Buck or Billy Epler saying this is the lineup, this is the script, or, the analytics people saying this is what you have to do here in this situation, we're never going to know, right? What is the percentage of decisions made purely by Buck, or what are the decisions that are made for him? Right? We're in this day and age, the way the modern manager operates, it's very much a collaborative thing. But the one thing Buck can control that I think he hasn't done a really good job of is the message, is the post-game press conferences. You've seen him be combative. You've seen him, really just saying, well, I thought we played well. Or, you've seen kind of a lot of what I saw when things went bad in Baltimore, where you would say the sky is blue. And he'd say, well, I wouldn't say that, but you can say it. Right. And so you're kind of left with this like defensive, angry man. And you're looking at these questionable decisions that happen in game, and you have no idea who's responsible for them. And by some extent, I think Buck has turned the attention and the spotlight on him and his job status because of the way he's handled these post-game press conferences. This is a guy who was manager of the year last year. This is a guy who was beloved by a large faction of the Mets fan base. And I think the way he handled a lot of those post-game press conferences, now they have gotten better. Buck swears that he hasn't read my column, so I don't know if it's just because they've been winning. Now, they have gotten better in that regard, but to me, you have to present as the manager, you're the public face of the team. You have to present a positive front. You have to present the message and present it well, and that's something that I feel like he was struggling at when the Mets were on the hot seat, and that in turn put him on the hot seat as well.
Joe, do you blame Buck for any of the Mets struggles this season?
Of course, you have to. I mean, I think it's the blame's got to go all around. Like it goes without saying, the players need to perform on the field. That's like obvious. But the bullpen decisions have certainly been questionable. One thing that I've noticed throughout the year that kind of gets under my skin a little bit is even when things were going badly, there's a lack of sense of urgency with his bullpen usage. And he always feels like it's a 162 game season, which it is. But when things are going really poorly and they need to kind of turn things around in a quick way, you're throwing the likes of Dominic Leone in the 7th inning in a 1-run game, or putting Jeff Brigham in the 8th inning of a 2-run game, and things like that. Like, to me, it gets a little cute at times, but yeah, it's a combined effort. The front office put the team together that lacked the bullpen depth, which is why you're seeing the likes of Dominic Leone, etc. Buck's not picking the players. He just manages what he's given. And like Britt said before, almost the whole team's performing below expectations. So he gets a chunk of it, but it has to go all around.
I do feel like in San Diego, at least on this last road trip, the leash was a little tighter in terms of the bullpen. You know, like as soon as a guy got on, he was pretty quick to pull the plug. But with the trade deadline less than a month away, the Mets could be sellers, they could be buyers, they could stand pat. So on Wednesday, St. Louis Cardinals president of baseball ops said, quote, "Right now I can tell you that we are going to trade people. I just don't know if it's going to be household names or more of guys who are just not likely to be here next year," end quote. So, Britt, are there any names on the Cardinals that you could see the Mets making a move for?
So if you look at kind of what the Mets are going to do, if we're assuming here that the Mets aren't going to be sellers, we're assuming they're going to be buyers. They're going to buy people, or they want to buy people that don't cost a lot of prospects and also that are part of this organization's future, right? They're not in a position to get these rentals because they're still fighting to even be relevant in the playoff race. So when I look at the Cardinals, my question is, to what level are they going to be sellers? Right? If they're just going to sell these rentals, these Jack Flaherty type guys, then it's really not going to have Jordan Montgomery. Then you're really not going to see a fit. Now, if they're going to make Paul Goldschmidt available, Nolan Arenado available, if they're really going to go down to the studs and get real creative, then I'm listening as the Mets, right? Then I'm like, okay, we could potentially be trade partners here. But I think the truth is probably that the Cardinals are going to do just enough to kind of look toward next year to get rid of these rentals. They're not going to totally strip it down. They're not an organization that has traditionally at all not wanted to win every year. And the Mets, again, aren't in that position where they need like one piece to put them over the edge, right? They are fighting to not be sellers themselves. So I don't see them, at least on paper, lining up as any kind of match.
Joe, what other options do you see for the Mets as potential trade deadline options?
Bullpen, and more bullpen. So if they're going to be buying it all, which would require a really big stretch coming right out of the break, we had talked about on the Mets pod how important the stretch right before the break was, and they largely played well until the end. And just losing 2 games at the end just puts you a sour taste going into the break. But if they come out hot, they certainly need to add to the bullpen. 2 guys, like, even if it's smaller level deals like the Trevor Gott deal, where they basically bought Trevor Gott for the cost of Chris Flexen's contract. They're not interested in giving up prospects like Britt suggested before, certainly not any of their high level ones. So I would expect if they do buy, it will not be at a significant level that costs anything that they consider a part of the near or long-term future. So I guess we'll see how the next couple of weeks go.
Do either of you, and I just got to ask, see a world in where maybe they would give up someone like a David Robertson?
Yes. 100%.
If
they decide that they're not going for it this year, what is the point of having a guy who could net you prospects and pieces of your future? We talked about how good he's been. Teams are always looking for bullpen help. The later innings that you can get, the more you can get for these guys. So absolutely.
David Robertson, Tommy Pham, maybe even Mark Canha if you pay down the money. And then the big elephant in the room, do they look to move someone like Max Scherzer or Justin Verlander? Will Steve Cohen pay down enough money to get a worthwhile return if things are not turning around here the next 2 weeks? So the time is now for the Mets. So when the off day ends today and they're back tomorrow, they have to come out hot against the Dodgers. You
are 1,000% right. They're going to have to step it up if they want to make a playoff push. So with that said, let's do some one word and why for what you want to see from the following guys in the second half. Joe, first up, Max Scherzer.
Finish. He needs to finish his starts. There's been far too many starts, and that doesn't mean complete games. That means there's been far too many starts that the Mets are giving Max multiple leads, and he is continually giving them up. I go back to the Yankee start. That's the one that just sticks out in my mind. There's been others, but that kind of was the start of it. They gave him a 5-1 lead, and I kind of sat back and said, great, Mets are going to beat the Yankees tonight. And lo and behold, that quickly turned on its head. So Max Scherzer needs to start finishing his outings. If that means 6 innings, that means 6 innings. But he is consistently giving up leads that the offense is giving him. And that is certainly not what you expect out of one of your 2 aces.
Okay, Britt, what about Jeff McNeil?
I think for one word for him, it would be improve. I mean, that's how I feel about most of this Mets team, quite honestly. I'm not saying he has to go out there and lead the lead in batting average, but look, as we talked about, besides Tommy Pham, no one in this lineup is doing what they should be doing relative to expectations. So, I'd love to see a guy like that come out and, come out hot. And it doesn't have to be going on this crazy home run streak. No, like, how about just some extra base hits? right? How about just consistently getting on base? I mean, this is a lineup that for a long time, you're just waiting on just an outburst. And they've had a couple really big innings, and you keep waiting for it to carry over. And I think McNeil is such a big part of this lineup that having a guy like that come out really strong in this opening series could really have a ripple effect. I mean, these guys are just looking for something to get them going. So it would be improved for him and probably improved for most of this roster.
Joe, what about Justin Verlander?
Consistency. He has starts where he looks like the Justin Verlander ace that you paid for. 7 innings, shutout ball, strike out 9 guys. You see that? That's like perfect. That's what we signed. And then he'll battle through 5 innings and throw 110 pitches almost in 5 innings. And he needs to find a consistent middle ground. And, maybe that's just not to be. I mean, he's 40 years old at this stage, and maybe consistency is an unrealistic ask, but that's what I'm looking for. He won the Cy Young last year, so I don't think he aged that much overnight. And the stuff is there. The fastball velocity is there. The breaking ball's crisp when he's throwing it well. So find some consistency in the second half, because it can't be the Kodai Senga show in the rotation.
Yeah, I don't think consistency is an unrealistic ask, but I think asking him to repeat a Cy Young season is a little bit unrealistic at 40 years old. Britt, Starling Marte.
Gosh, I'd love to use improve again, but it's like with a guy like him, find your speed again, find your bat again, right? Like he was a guy who was so integral to their success last year. And you saw that in the postseason when they didn't have him, when they were worried about his finger and things, that like he was a guy who maybe opponents didn't realize was really the heart and soul, it felt like oftentimes, of that Mets lineup. So to me, it's find whatever you did last year. Again, like Verlander, did he age that much in the season that the sprint speed is drastically off, that the offense is drastically down? I mean, this is only the second season of that 4-year deal. He has to find a way to get back to the old Starling Marte. And the Mets are very aware of all these drops in statistics, but honestly, it's going to come down to him to make these adjustments, whether that's to his conditioning or his approach. His numbers have just been down across the board. And even if you look at his peripheral numbers, those aren't super encouraging either. So he's got to find a way to get back to the old Starling Marte, because to me, he's just such a critical element to this team.
Yeah, it seemed like maybe the off-season surgery had something to do with it. But let's talk about the month of July. The Mets started July going 6-2 before the break to finish out the month. They're going to face the Dodgers, the White Sox, the Red Sox, the Yankees, and the Nationals. So, Joe, what do you need to see from this team in order to finish out the month of July?
Just win. They need to win. And I mean, that's really simple. But I want to see the starting pitching consistently go deep in the games like they did in that 6-game winning streak. That felt like the 2022 Mets in a way. Pitchers were pitching deeper in the games. You were using your best relievers in the spots that they should be used, and they were scoring runs. So kind of get back to what you were doing in that 6-game stretch. And the winning has to start now, because like Britt said before, that they're not giving up on Buck Showalter, and they're not giving up on the season. Well, if they don't win quite a few baseball games in the next week and a half, some of the players that they like in that clubhouse are going to find their way out of the clubhouse. So it's on the players now. Start winning some baseball games.
It really does seem very, very do or die, especially with the trade deadline approaching. So let's look ahead. The Mets host the Dodgers for 3 games before their next off day on Monday. Britt, who is your X factor for this weekend series?
It's Marte. I mean, again, I just feel like, especially when you heard the new rules were announced, I'm like, oh, this is a guy who's going to capitalize on the stolen bases and the things like that. And it really just hasn't been there. We've talked about their starting pitching. I think that's obvious. If they're going to have a surge, it's going to be because Verlander and Scherzer, pitch like we know they can pitch, or pitch like we expected them to pitch. But to me, on the offensive side, I think getting Marte going would just be such a big deal for them going forward, going into that second half of the season. And, we talked so much about how they traveled more miles than any team in baseball. They played more extra innings than any team in baseball, right? And so their schedule now, that what we're not talking about is they have so many home games left. This is now the easy part, no matter who they're playing. They have 40 of the remaining 70 games are at home. So this is the time. And I think if you're the Mets, if you're a guy like Marte, maybe you use this all-star break to literally just lay on the couch and not move and help your body feel better. I don't know, but he has got to find a way to get it going.
Joe, what about you? Who's your X factor this weekend?
I'm gonna go with Jeff McNeil, so we'll stay on the offensive side of the ball. Hopefully, the golf that he got to play on his time off, he's able to fix his swing. Because I remember that was a Yoenis Cespedes thing from back in the day. He would say if his swing was ever off, he'd go golfing, and then things would kind of fix itself. So hopefully, Jeff McNeil can come out, and you want to see line drives from him. That's really what it is. His fly ball rate is up. His line drive rate is down. When Jeff McNeil's at his best, he's spraying line drives, line to line, gap to gap. We want to see that again because, I mean, Jeff McNeil winning the batting title last year wasn't a fluke. Not hitting for good average is the fluke of Jeff McNeil. Correct. So he just needs to get back to what works.
That is so true. All right. So how are you guys going to spend the rest of your off day, Britt?
I've got tons of people coming to the house to fix stuff, as you guys know, as I was talking about. We already had the ant guy come. We got the contractor coming. We got someone to trim the tree. Real exciting times here at my house.
Joe?
I lead a very exciting life. I'm going to be finishing my new top 10 Mets prospect list, which will go up on SNY.TV after the MLB draft. So got to update that. And Thursday tends to be a night that we order out dinner. And I have no idea what we're going to get, but a very exciting off day as we get ready for the biggest stretch of Mets baseball of the season defining, starting tomorrow.
Can we get a preview? Is Mike Vasil on it, the top 10 list?
Mike Vasil is definitely on the top 10.
Woo! Look out for that, definitely. All right. Thank you so much for watching this latest edition of Mets Off Day Live. We'll be back with another episode on Monday, July 17th at 12 p.m. Joe and Britt, thank you guys so much.